Hello, friends. Tonight, we take a quiet walk into the heart of ancient Rome, but not toward the familiar marvels of history. Beneath the arches, the mighty roads, and the impressive law codes linger stories of theatrical and genuinely unsettling punishments, crafted with a mix of creativity and cruelty. So, before settling in, gently click the like button and share in the comments where you're listening from. It's always a comfort to see the reach of our little community. Now, as the lights dim and the soft whir of a fan fills the background, let's journey together into these shadows. Let's start with the Vestals, guardians buried beneath the earth. In Rome, these priestesses were entrusted with sacred fire and sworn to absolute chastity, chosen before childhood turned to youth, set apart from men for 3 decades. They watched over the flame, believed to shield all of Rome from disaster. To break this vow was to court devastation, so grave it was seen as a disaster for the whole city. The sentence? Not a swift sword, but burial alive. Romans refused to shed a Vestal's blood, fearing divine anger, so they laid a small lantern, a bit of food, and a vessel of water in a vault. The stone sealed behind her. It was meant to keep sacred law blameless, at least outwardly. The woman was left in silence and darkness, while daily life moved on above. The men involved? Their fate was public, execution, equally severe, but less drawn out. For all its prestige, priority at festivals, travel with honor, the power to pardon those on death row, becoming a Vestal came with the threat of an agonizing end. Such seriousness was no exaggeration. One famous Vestal, Cornelia, protested her innocence loudly before the emperor himself, but found no mercy. If work has ever felt overwhelming, take comfort that your responsibilities don't come with a tomb of stone and a single flickering lamp. In Rome's world, punishment could be carved in stone, or pressed down by centuries of fear. Now, enter the poena culae, the penalty of the sack, one of Rome's wildest creative sentences. If a person killed their own father, they weren't tried, lectured, or even simply executed. Instead, the condemned was tied up, then sewn inside a large leather bag, accompanied by a dog representing lost loyalty, a monkey, the spirit of chaos, a snake for betrayal, and a rooster, another sign of misdeeds. The entire bundle, both person and animals, was tossed into a deep river. Why these animals? Historians believe each symbolized a different aspect of the crime: broken trust, disorder, treachery, sleepless guilt. Few endured this punishment, and it came out of history's closet mainly under rulers with a taste for spectacle. It wasn't just about the act. It was a brutal stage show for all to witness. So, if family troubles ever leave you sighing, remember there were times when discipline took a very different form. Crucifixion, the most infamous of Rome's executions. Usually it meant a slow, public death, a warning to all watching. Yet sometimes officials flipped the instrument, hanging the condemned upside down, making suffering even worse. This twist was saved for those marked out for extra shame, defiant rebels, outspoken dissidents, or those the Roman rulers sought to utterly break. Perhaps the most well-known victim was Simon Peter, said to have requested his cross be reversed, humbling himself before his faith. The torture of hanging upside down forced blood downward, made breathing nearly impossible, and amplified agony. In time, the inverted cross became a misunderstood symbol. At first, it marked humility, but later, it came to mean something far darker in pop culture. For Romans, though, it was just a way to make a statement nobody would miss. Decimation, the harshest military discipline. Rome's army was disciplined by rules few could endure. When a legion showed cowardice or tried to disobey, commanders might order decimation. Soldiers would be lined up and counted off, every 10th man, dictated by fate, would be beaten to death by his own fellow soldiers. No outside executioner, just the hands of comrades, showing that Rome's discipline could be as cruel as any foe. Those who survived received fewer rations, rough treatment, and were forced to camp unprotected. The thinking was cold. Harness fear within the ranks, and loyalty would follow. This system, though chilling, was effective. It kept troops in line through shared dread, and anyone thinking of fleeing the battlefield had more to fear from within than without. Take heart, then, if your workplace insists on team-building events. At least the stakes are not so final. The fork of heretics, a silent torment. In the last days of the ancient empire, as Rome's beliefs grew tighter and punishments darker, a peculiar device found its place, the fork of heretics. This was no ordinary torture, more an ordeal of endurance. A two-pronged iron rod with points pressing under the chin and against the breast, fastened around the neck. One wrong word, one doze, and the sharp tips would pierce flesh. Speaking, even swallowing, brought agony. It was a punishment of stillness, of being forced into silence. Not only heretics, but anyone accused of blasphemy or challenging the religious order could face it. Sometimes inscriptions, confessions, or declarations of guilt were added to the fork, making the ordeal a lesson for all who looked on. The fork didn't draw blood, not right away. Its power lay in draining the will, bringing exhaustion, pain, and quiet suffering. Picture holding in a sneeze for hours, and you get just a sense of what a day under the fork might feel like. Cast off from the Tarpeian rock, the original public rejection. Betraying Rome brought no chance for quiet exile or a second chance. Instead, the condemned were marched through the city, stripped of their rights and dignity, and brought to a cliff above the Forum, the Tarpeian Rock. Their sentence, a drop of 80 feet, witnessed by a waiting crowd. The rock's name comes from a girl, Tarpeia, who, hoping for gold from Rome's enemies, instead found death and became a byword for treachery. After her, traitors, corrupt officials, and those who deceived the state would be paraded and cast out, both from the city and from history itself. Just beyond the edge, the city's greatest temple sat, so the fallen might glimpse Roman glory, even if only for an instant, before disappearing forever. Later, more dramatic sentences took over, but the Tarpeian Rock remained a symbol of Rome's method, spare, with nothing to mask the meaning. Execution in the arena, death by beasts. The Colosseum's walls have seen more than games. They hosted terrible punishments. The damnatio ad bestias, condemned to face wild animals before tens of thousands of eyes. Not only criminals, but prisoners of war, and especially Christians unwilling to renounce their beliefs, stood where lions, leopards, or even elephants waited, hungry. Sometimes the condemned would be dressed as figures from Roman myths, turning the moment into a cruel play. There were no true trials here, only a verdict seen by all, and the violence that followed. To ensure the show went on, animals might be prodded or left without food, and if guilt was not enough, sometimes simple bad fortune, or defying the wrong law, was reason enough to face the beasts. The intent was not just death, but spectacle, a public warning that even being innocent might not keep you safe. Over time, those who died in the arena inspired others, but for most, being sent to the Colosseum was about terror, not glory. Today, if jury duty feels inconvenient, remember that for some, the only trial came with claws and teeth. Honorable suicide, Rome's merciful alternative. At certain times, to be condemned didn't always mean a brutal death. If you were powerful or well-connected, Rome allowed you a somber exit. You received an order, delivered calmly. Take your own life and spare us the trouble. The reason might be rebellion, insult, or simply displeasure. If you obeyed, your family often kept possessions, and your reputation could be left untouched, a final act of control allowed by the state. This was seen as a dignified end, even something to be proud of, in a culture built on honor. Sometimes the condemned would spend their last moments speaking to friends, writing goodbyes, and, as with the philosopher Seneca, using a warm bath to ease the last moments. Forced suicide offered a quiet but firm message. Even death did not free one from Rome's careful hands. The wooden donkey, when mere sitting became torture. Among Rome's chilling inventions was the wooden donkey. This wasn't an animal, but a sharply angled wooden beam, shaped so that those sentenced would ride it, their weight bearing down on a razor-like edge. Weights tied to the ankles increased the pain, pulling the person down with every passing minute. Sometimes the device was metal, sometimes heated, and modifications varied with the creativity of the executioner. Soldiers who showed disobedience, slaves, or thieves might be sent to the donkey for hours or more, enduring humiliation before a watching crowd. Sometimes it left only pain and shame. Other times it left wounds impossible to heal, in body and spirit. So if your chair seems uncomfortable today, pause, and remember, the very act of sitting once carried a far heavier price. Facial branding. Your crime, worn forever. In a time before modern records or digital footprints, Rome kept track of criminals by marking faces with hot irons. These brands spelled out the crime, runaway, liar, thief, in raised, blackened letters. The punishment was not hidden. It took place in open squares for all to witness. The message was clear. You could never hide or start anew. Life with a brand brought endless judgment, isolation, and hardship, especially for escaped slaves who bore the mark for life. Some tried to hide their scars with makeup or attempted to alter them, but these were often new crimes. Later, Roman rulers tried to soften face branding, but the intent remained: public and permanent shame. Next time someone asks you to face the consequences, remember the past could make this phrase deeply literal. Tongue removal, when silence was enforced by force. Ancient Rome allowed much debate, but certain remarks brought dangerous consequences, especially insults against the gods or emperor. Rather than imprisonment or a warning, blasphemy or political dissent could mean the loss of speech forever. Tongue removal was a brutal spectacle, often done on public display, with no care for comfort. It forced a victim into permanent silence, unable to argue, pray, or call for help. Those who survived faced a life of isolation, unable to join even the simplest conversations. Early Christian martyrs, who continued to speak their faith even under threat, suffered this fate, turning forced silence into a symbol of courage and spirit. Rome, ever eager for control, found in this punishment a way to ensure the spoken word remained within the boundaries it set. Breaking on the wheel, pain made into a warning. There was a form of execution in ancient Rome that blurred the line between suffering and display: the wheel. Those condemned were tied with their arms and legs spread, and the executioner would use a heavy bar to break limbs one after another. The goal wasn't quick death, but slow torment and disfigurement. The broken body was then woven among the spokes, left for the wind, or sometimes set atop a pole, visible to all as a deterrent. If, by some chance, a person survived, a final blow would end their misery. This punishment was used for offenses considered especially grave, and though born in Rome, it lasted into medieval times, growing even more elaborate. The next time daily life feels hard, imagine a world where punishment meant not only pain, but being left on display as part of the lesson. Death by hot ash, silence inside a pit. Romans found some of their most sinister punishments in the shadows, such as execution by hot ash. This method, traced to Emperor Nero, involved burying a person up to their neck, then pouring heated ashes in through a funnel. There was no wound, no loud violence, only suffocation, slowly and terribly from within. The choice of ash was deliberate. It signaled utter disregard, as if the condemned and all they had been deserved only remains and waste. The punishment was rare, used only for those the emperor most despised. To the crowd it might hardly seem dramatic, but inside that pit, the experience would have been terrifying, the world growing colder, quieter, darker, as each breath became a struggle. Life in Rome could be taken away with swords and fire, or with an even quieter cruelty, dust and silence. The burning tunic, death by fire as performance. Fashion in Rome never killed, unless you were forced into the tunica molesta, the troublesome garment soaked in pitch and oil, tailored to fit tightly and set ablaze. Those chosen for this fate walked into the arena, or stood before crowds, often accused of arson or defying the state. Once the tunic caught fire, escape was impossible, and the flames quickly engulfed body and breath. This punishment was not just about death, it was about display. Under rulers like Nero, burning tunics lit up night parties or sent messages to those the emperor wished to frighten. Sometimes, victims were dressed up in imitation of mythic figures, turning the moment into a dark echo of legends. Every movement, every scream was part of the spectacle, a lesson for the living that resistance brought not just pain, but unforgettable public agony. Damnatio memoriae, being erased from memory itself. Some punishments in Rome lasted beyond death itself. For those who brought shame to the empire, a failed leader, a rebellious senator, or a disgraced general, the sentence was not only execution, but erasure. All statues, inscriptions, even coins would have their image or name removed. Portraits were painted over, stonework chiseled away, history rewritten so thoroughly that, in time, it was as if the condemned had never existed. One such case was that of Emperor Geta. After his brother had him killed, all traces of Geta were destroyed, including images held by their own mother. Only faint outlines and partially erased figures recall what was removed. This was not just about vengeance, it was control over memory itself. If Rome could delete a person from history, it could reshape the future in its own image. Today, this might remind us of social erasure, but Rome accomplished it without technology, merely the determined hands of those who held power. At the end of all Rome's strange and terrifying punishments, perhaps the worst was not violence, but being forgotten, disappearing not just in body, but in memory, leaving only silence behind. In the early 1800s, as America looked westward, the landscape stretched vast and open, a place of hope, risk, and silent promise. Cities in the east felt crowded, busy with factories and farms pushing against every edge. Beyond them lay a sweep of land, untried, but filled with dreams. That promise filtered through tavern whispers, church pews, and evening stories, where people spoke of rivers like silver and valleys that blossomed freely. The Louisiana Purchase had doubled the nation overnight, offering space as far as the mind could see, if the government's word could be trusted. For many, moving west was more than a direction. It was escape from old obligations and a new chance. The past didn't matter as much as what you could do. Folks left behind debts, sorrows, and disappointments, meeting on the trails. Farmers seeking richer earth, widows after peace, and adventurers chasing stories heard around campfires. Highways were just maps in the mind, and those who started out made their way with uncertainty as a constant companion. Would wagons hold together over the mountains? Would the river let them cross? Would the wilds offer food, or only danger? Still, thousands went. Whole families, with infants bundled in blankets and elders nestled among barrels and supplies. Heading west meant risking everything, every crossing, every rocky trail, every storm, for the hope that the world ahead was bigger than what was left behind. The frontier was not simply geography, but a test of hope and nerve, each traveler carving a small piece of order from the immense wild. The covered wagon became the symbol of this migration. Not fancy carts, but sturdy wooden frames drawn by oxen, topped with canvas that billowed like sails across the prairie. Called prairie schooners, these wagons carried the essentials: flour, salt meat, beans, iron pots, seeds for the future, and perhaps one precious quilt. Weight was survival. Too much could break the wagon or wear out the animals. Most didn't sit inside, but instead walked alongside for miles, day after day. Bones jostled by the road, feet sore and tired. Privacy was rare, comfort almost unknown. Beneath the wagon, nestled in makeshift coops, eggs might travel along for a future homestead. Every crack, every muddy rut on the trail wrote a line in this new story. A story not in books, but in the ground itself. Life on the road was nothing like the stories told years later. Days started before sunup. Voices weren't needed to rouse campers. The creak of harness and the call of drivers was enough. 16 kilometers in a good day, less if the trail was rough or the water ran thin. Landmark routes, Oregon, Santa Fe, California, wore their scars into the land. Broken wheels, discarded heirlooms, the small markers of those who fell and would never see the West. Meals were basic and often the same, day after day. Coffee was a rarity. Water's safety was a constant gamble, and hope for clean streams might be the difference between wellness and illness. This was how the American story in the West began. Not with glory, but with steady determination, marked by the sound of wagon wheels, the endless prairies, and the simple, stubborn belief that something better waited just ahead. In those days, meals were carefully measured out: salted meat, hard biscuits, dried beans, and, on lucky evenings, whatever wild animals someone could hunt. Berries and wild onions were treats, small joys on a road that offered few comforts. The greatest threat was sickness. Illness moved swiftly through the camps. Cholera struck hardest, spreading through tainted water and often claiming lives within hours. Other dangers, dysentery, scurvy, even snake bites, took their share. There were no trained doctors, only remedies passed down and the fragile hope that they might be enough. Sometimes hope simply was not, but even then there was happiness to be found. Children turned sticks and stones into games. Some skipped in the shade of the wagons. Now and then, a wedding or a birth was celebrated right there on the trail. Families were built, not only by blood, but in shared struggle and the quiet understanding that came from dust and hard work. Come nightfall, wagons would circle together, not only for safety from imagined raids, but mostly to protect each other from thieves, wild creatures, and the cold night winds. Campfires glowed, bread cooked on hot stones, and sometimes someone played the fiddle, laughter rising into the dark. Morning always meant more miles, more raw, untamed land, and fewer certainties. Each new day on the trail was an act of endurance. Life became a careful routine. There was little room for weeping. Grief stayed private because the land pressed them ever westward. After weeks, even months of walking, the appearance of green trees, running water, and open flatlands would bring tears of relief to many travelers. Finding a piece of earth to settle only meant the beginning of another challenge. Homesteading was never easy. There were no ready-made houses, no fences, no pathways. only open land and the urgent race against the changing seasons. Shelter always came first. A small, one-room log cabin, barely enough space for a family. Tools were scarce, carried across miles by oxen or in calloused hands. There were no chainsaws, no plans, just axes, perseverance, and guesswork. The floor was often simply packed dirt, which turned muddy in rain, and the windows covered with animal hides or worn paper, desperate attempts to let in light and hold back the cold. Many cabins began with only a hole in the roof to let smoke escape, so a cough was often part of life. Families slept on piles of straw, furs, or husks pulled from the last harvest. If luck allowed, beds were made of rope strung across rough wooden frames. Some stuffed moss between the walls, but if that wasn't possible, the winds came right inside. Then came winter, the true test. If there wasn't enough firewood or stored food, hunger and frostbite waited. Blizzards could lock families inside for days. Voices of coyotes and wolves howled in the night. But families pressed on. Candles were shaped from animal fat. Children learned to mend torn clothes and cook over flames. Pages from the Bible were read by flickering light. Letters were written, even if no one knew when or if they would ever reach their destination. Neighbors were few and far between, sometimes just a distant promise on the horizon. Kindness might come as a shared meal, a roof raised together, or the loan of an animal to plow a field. Survival wasn't about being the strongest. It was about sticking together. A single family faced hardship, but 10 families stood a better chance. That first winter carved dreams into something tougher. Some survived, hardened by the cold. Others lost their hopes in the deep snow. On the American frontier, real strength was found in the willingness to endure, to give up comforts without complaint, and to quietly face whatever came. This kind of strength showed itself most in the women who lived and worked the land. Disregard the stories of delicate women from old books. These women met every test head-on. As soon as their boots touched new ground, they became everything the homestead needed: builders, farmers, healers, butchers, teachers. If a job needed done, they did it. Mornings began well before sunrise, churning butter, baking bread, and milking cows before many had even woken. They planted gardens, preserved food for the year ahead, took care of the animals, and often made every piece of clothing from scratch. When illness struck, they reached for herbs and learned cures. During childbirth, they served as midwives, for neighbors, and sometimes for themselves. A woman could kill a snake at dawn with a shovel and in the afternoon sit with her children to read and learn, always putting dinner on the table before dusk. Firearms were familiar in their hands. If a husband was away, or gone for good, women stood guard with whatever was close: a rifle, an axe, a heavy pan. There are stories of women fighting off wolves, outlaws, and other dangers, all while comforting a child. Loneliness could be just as fierce, with neighbors miles away and mail arriving only every few months. The quiet could overwhelm, yet these women persevered, sowing civilization out of the wilderness, one patch, one lesson, one loaf at a time. Frontier women built the heart of every new community. They arranged barn raisings and cared for sick neighbors. They brought folks together for worship long before there were churches or schools. As time went on and towns grew, it was often the women who made sure schools opened and libraries stocked their shelves. Far from being minor figures, they were the backbone of the frontier, overworked, often taken for granted, but unforgettable once you had seen their strength. So when you picture the Old West, remember not just cowboys on horses, but a sturdy woman, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, shotgun by the door, and cornbread in the oven. As every wagon headed into new territory, it is important to remember the land was never empty. It was already home to countless indigenous nations. People who had cared for these plains, rivers, and mountains for hundreds, even thousands of years. From the Great Plains to the distant Pacific, these lands held traditions, sacred places, and families. Rivers and migration paths were full of meaning and memory. Yet, to most newcomers and those in power, the land was viewed not as home, but as opportunity. Histories of agreement began and unraveled. The government made treaty after treaty with native nations, promising peace, land, and protection. But these promises were so often broken. Each wave of settlers forced a retreat, sometimes signed with a pen, other times with fire or violence. Entire peoples were pushed onto reservations, most far from ancestral places, land that was often harsh and unfamiliar. Nations, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Lakota, the Comanche, and so many more, became strangers on their own soil. Some native groups tried negotiation, others chose to fight. Armed resistance led to clashes. The Black Hawk War, Sand Creek, Little Bighorn. But even when a battle was won, the greater war was lost. The government didn't stop, sending more soldiers, building railroads, and allowing more settlers to claim what had long belonged to someone else. This wasn't only a matter of land. It was an attempt to erase a culture. Children were taken to distant schools, their languages forbidden, their traditions banned, their identities threatened. Yet, against all odds, indigenous people survived. Their languages were quietly shared, their songs sung in defiance, their stories carried from generation to generation like flames in the darkness. Popular stories about the pioneer West often overlook this truth, but history holds more than one story. The courage of those who moved west and the sorrow of those displaced both belong to our past. The land, like history itself, contains many truths. Law was slow to arrive at the edge of settlement, and in many new towns, order was a fragile thing. There were seldom officers, courts, or jails in those early days. Justice had less to do with rules, more with whoever held sway at the moment. Often it was groups of citizens declaring themselves the law. When a crime happened, a stolen horse, a broken shop window, or worse, they would gather, hold quick trials in makeshift settings, and deliver hard decisions. Punishment could be as quick as a rope or a warning to leave and never return. As towns grew, so did more official lawmen, marshals, deputies, sheriffs. Names like Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Wild Bill Hickok became part of legend. Some stood for what was right, some did not, and many existed somewhere in between, keeping peace as best they could. As law arrived, so did trouble. Drifters, gamblers, outlaws seeking a place to disappear. Men like Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and Butch Cassidy became famous, their stories spreading wider than the lines they crossed. Newspapers painted them as folk heroes, though their actions often left scars and sorrow behind. Justice was never predictable. A person could face death for a small crime, while another might escape punishment after something far worse. Threats and grudges shaped the law as much as fairness. Even real courtrooms, where they appeared, were sometimes little more than rooms in general stores. Still, communities gradually built true courts. Judges replaced vigilantes, jails replaced tree branches. But the old stories never fully faded. The frontier never quite stopped being wild, and justice never forgot to carry a pistol. At first, life on the frontier moved no faster than a wagon, slow, steady, and dependent on the weather. But in time, a new sound broke that silence, the sharp call of the steam whistle. When the railroad arrived, it changed nearly everything. Journeys that once took months by wagon could now be made in days. The first railroad linking east and west finished in 1869, and suddenly, What was wild country became a path for families, goods, and dreams. New settlements appeared almost overnight beside the train tracks. Supplies came more quickly. Things that pioneers had hoarded or crafted by hand now arrived by train. For many, trains meant survival. Medicine could arrive before an illness turned deadly. Crops could be sold far away, and long-awaited letters could finally make it home in days, not months. The plains and mountains didn't feel so risky now. The unknown became a little more manageable. Alongside the iron rails came the telegraph, thin wires carrying news and messages in tiny pulses of sound. For the first time, people on distant homesteads received news on the same day it happened. A rancher in Wyoming might learn about a national election moments after it ended. The world began to feel connected. The changes were huge. Economies grew. The power of government reached further. Even the law found it easier to keep pace. But not all saw these changes as progress. Native nations knew that every new wire and track meant more of their land and freedom were being lost. Some resisted, trying to stop the lines or disrupt the trains, but they could not hold them back forever. The rails rolled onward. Towns missed by the railroad often faded, while others flourished, quickly growing into busy cities. As the wilderness shrank mile by mile, the frontier changed from lonely struggle to something busy and linked, not gone, but changed by steam and signals. By the last years of the 1800s, one era ended. The line between wild land and settled country blurred, faded, and finally vanished. In 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau declared, "There can hardly be said to be a frontier line." The push westward had finished. The forests were cut, railroads stretched from ocean to ocean, and the open prairies were divided and sold. Buffalo herds were almost gone, and native tribes now lived on far-off reservations. Land that had once seemed endless was mapped, measured, and parceled out. For some, this meant success, the continent tamed, a dream reached, a country stretching from sea to sea. For others, native people and those uprooted from their homes, it meant bitter loss, a hush where tradition and memory once lived. But more than geography changed. The end of the frontier became a story about who Americans were and how they saw themselves. The rugged loner, the campfire storyteller, the pioneer became symbols in stories and song. Writers claimed that the frontier shaped the character of America, its tough independence, its hopefulness, its adaptability. It gave rise to the cowboy, the homestead president, the gold seeker, all woven into the myths of the country. But the truth was more complicated. The frontier was made of sweat and sickness, determination and hardship, courage and injustice. Its legacy is a tangle of pride and pain. Now, the frontier exists less in geography and more in spirit, in the urge to go where no one has gone before, whether into land, science, or space. The wagons are still, log cabins are museum pieces, the trails are now highways. But if you listen for it, the spirit remains in all those who reach beyond the known. The American frontier did not truly vanish. It became the ground beneath the dream. Even long before there were tools or strings, sound lived in us. The beat of a foot on soil, the clap of hands, the drum of a heart in a quiet chest. These were the first music. It began with our breath. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before farming or writing, early people discovered something incredible in sound. Around fires, in caves, on the grasslands, they found that movements, a stomp, a shout, a whistle, could stir emotion, call attention, and offer comfort against fear. Music was not simply invented one day. It grew from something deep inside us. Picture a group of early people gathered by the firelight. Someone calls out in a rising tone. Another claps along. A third imitates the song of birds. Words are not yet needed. The shared sounds make them a community. Before there were flutes, before there were drums, sound itself was treated as something sacred. Many scholars believe early music came from imitation, copying animal calls to hunt, or using natural sounds to speak across distances. At some point, these noises changed from being just useful to something expressive, from a simple rhythm to a lullaby, from a scream to a song. Some theories suggest music came before language, or perhaps alongside it. Even now, tiny children respond more easily to music than to words. Pitch, rhythm, and vibration run deep in us. We didn't learn music. In some ways, we remembered it. Most beautifully, this first music belonged to everyone. It was not limited to the few. Wherever humans lived, in Africa, Asia, Europe, anywhere with hands and voices, music found a way. Even before the first flute was shaped, before strings and drums, humans knew that sound could touch the heart. And that was only the beginning. In ancient, icy Europe, where mammoths wandered and glaciers carved the land, a quiet revolution began, not with tools or fire, but with sound. One day, somewhere in a shadowy cave, an early human picked up a hollow bird bone. By carefully making holes in it and blowing, a pure, haunting note was born. This was not an accident, but the first real musical instrument. Archaeologists have found these bone flutes, more than 40,000 years old, in places like Germany's prehistoric caves. Crafted from vulture wings or mammoth ivory, these were not easy to make. Yet, the people who shaped them made holes for their fingers so they could play distinct tones, structured, repeatable, and designed to express something. Why make such an instrument? Perhaps it was to echo birdsong, call nature, or mark life's changes. Or maybe simply to offer beauty in long, dark nights. These flutes show us something important. Early humans were not just surviving, but imagining. They could see possibility even in a hollow bone. Playing music together, alone or in a group, brought people even closer. Around a fire, voices, flutes, clapping, and drumming rose together and echoed off the cave walls, likely the world's first concerts. And remember, these ancient flutes were made before people farmed, invented the wheel, or learned to write. Music came early, not as an extra, but as something people needed. The songs played on those Ice Age flutes are quiet messages from long ago, still powerful enough to stir the heart. If the flute gave us melody, the drum was our shared heartbeat. Long before cities or rulers, people met under the open sky, clapping, stomping, tapping out rhythm on earth and wood. Drums weren't crafted in one place. They appeared everywhere, as if people and the world itself needed to make music together. The first drums were likely nothing more than animal hide stretched across a hollow log or clay pot. They gave rhythm, structure, but they also marked rituals, communication, and strength. A drum could call for help, start a battle march, or gather the community. Drumming traditions in Africa go back tens of thousands of years. Drums were treated as voices, used to imitate tonal languages. In Siberia, drums helped shamans enter trances. In the Amazon, water drums sent thunder through the forests. Drums didn't require training, only the feeling of the beat. Drums were played at beginnings and ends, for births, for funerals, for celebrations, and for war. Their steady beat brought order to chaos, bringing people together, preparing warriors, marking festivals and changing seasons. As time passed, drums changed too. People painted, carved, and decorated their instruments. Drums became sacred objects. For many, a symbol of life or a bridge to the spiritual world. Even before writing or clocks, drums marked time and feeling. Through rhythm, the world made sense. As people settled into towns and cities, music grew from something simply for survival into something refined and artful. In ancient Mesopotamia, where great rivers carved kingdoms and writing began, we see music take new shape. There, music became more than survival. It became elegant. On surviving tablets, and carved into walls or buried beside royalty, we find the first stringed instruments, harps and lyres. These were no longer the secret flutes of distant caves, but works of beauty covered in gold, silver, and gemstones. The harp, with its gentle arch, became a symbol of grace and power. One famous lyre, found in the ruins of an ancient city, belonged to a noble woman. Its frame was decorated with gold and ended in a golden bull's head, more myth than mere instrument. Their strings played fixed notes, plucked gently, drawing out dreamlike sounds that drifted over ceremonies, storytelling, even star-watching. Scholars mapped the heavens, believing in a cosmic harmony, that the stars themselves made music. We find music written into Mesopotamian graves. The harp was thought to follow the soul beyond death. For them, music was both comfort and connection, a pathway between this world and the next. Other instruments roared and howled, but the harp whispered, a private sound for thought and reflection. In early civilization, perhaps for the first time, music made space for quiet and wonder. In the land of ancient Egypt, music was not just for art or entertainment. It was believed to be a sacred language, a gift sent from their deities. According to legend, it was the goddess Bat, who later became linked with Hathor, the bringer of music and joy, who first brought melody into the world. Music was everywhere, from temples to marketplaces, tombs to fields. Rather than the raw flutes of the past, Egyptian music mingled careful ceremony with daily chores. Laborers sang as they built pyramids, fishermen made up songs to the river, priests led hymns for holy rituals, women shook frame drums and rattles during births and funerals, at the start and end of life itself. Their instruments spanned harps, lutes, lyres, cymbals, and flutes. Harps, once plain, grew into tall, curved masterpieces with many strings and carried as much meaning as sound. The sistrum, a rattle with metal bars, became sacred to the worship of the goddesses Hathor and Isis, its sound a call to goodness, protection, and awakening. Musicians served temples and courts alike, praising gods and rulers with their songs. Even in death, music journeyed on. Tomb paintings show instruments and lyrics, as if the departed might bring music with them beyond the grave. For Egyptians, rhythm and melody balanced chaos and upheld the order of the universe. To make music was to echo the heart of creation. To the ancient Greeks, music was more than tunes. It was at the center of life, a science, a way to reach the soul, even a guide for understanding the world. While other cultures used music for celebration or worship, the Greeks wanted to know why music could move us. They searched for their answer in poetry, philosophy, and math. The story goes that Pythagoras, known for his work with triangles, became fascinated with sound when he heard blacksmiths at work. He noticed different-sized hammers made different-sounding strikes, leading him to experiment with plucked strings. When he divided a string, the sound changed in a pattern that could be measured and predicted. This led to the idea that the universe itself, from the stars above to music here on earth, was ordered and harmonious. Greek instruments showed this love of balance and reason. The lyre, a delicate stringed instrument, stood for learning and culture. Poets were often pictured with one. The aulos, a twin-piped flute, was wild and full of feeling, played for theater, rituals, even war. Beyond just sound, the Greeks tied music to ethics. The philosopher Plato believed different musical modes could affect a person's spirit, some encouraging bravery, others leading to laziness. Music mattered in shaping society's character, and teaching the right songs was vital. To the Greeks, music offered healing, guidance, and a connection to something greater, and their rules for intervals and harmonies echoed for centuries. Music in Greece became both the meeting place of reason and beauty, numbers and emotion, a place to think deeply and feel deeply. If Greece gave music its model, Rome gave it power. The Romans used music not just for joy, but for ceremony, control, and command. Festivals, religious rites, gladiatorial games, and especially battlefields resounded with music. Where Greeks saw music as divine, Romans made it practical. The cornu, a giant curved brass horn, was carried taller than the soldier who played it, blaring out signals across the din of war. Another instrument, the tuba, was a long, straight trumpet that cut through noise on the battlefield. With these, armies marched and turned in perfect time, moving like one body. Music on the Roman battlefield was as much about certainty and fear as about order. But Roman music filled daily life, too. In temples, flute players led rituals. At public games, musicians played before events began. At rich dinners, lyres and early pipe organs echoed in the background. Romans borrowed ideas from Greece and everywhere else, combining sounds from Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean into something entirely their own. Roman writers left few records about the science of music. They were more interested in using it than understanding it. For Rome, music was a tool, a part of life, not a puzzle to be solved. Rome's greatest gift to music was its ability to send sound far and wide, to the farthest borders of the empire. While the West became tied to empire and order, the East explored music's inner meaning. In ancient India, music was seen as a way to reach the sacred, not just art, but a spiritual path. From the earliest Vedic texts, Indian music began as chant, not just recited, but sung, each tune believed to shape mood or reality. Instruments such as the veena, linked to the goddess Saraswati, and the mridangam drum made their music unique. Each song was built around specific scales and rhythms, meant to inspire certain emotions or times of day. Making music in India was an act of discipline, a form of balance. In ancient China, music was also deeply respected, but with its own focus. According to legend, music was so powerful it could keep the country in harmony. Under wise rulers like Emperor Shun, music was believed to shape character, restore peace, and bring unity to the people. The right sounds, played on proper instruments with careful tuning, could balance the world. The guqin, a quiet zither, was played for deep thought, while large bronze bells marked rank and order in the emperor's court. Chinese musicians believed that tunes matched the harmony of the cosmos itself. In both India and China, music was woven into everyday life, spirituality, and discipline. Not only a source of comfort, but a guiding principle, helping people reach for the eternal. From ancient flutes carved thousands of years ago to shimmering harps of old kingdoms, from rattles that called the gods in Egypt to the soft strings in China, music has always been much more than entertainment. It is a language that needs no translation, older than any empire, stronger than borders. But why, after all these years, does music still move us? Because it speaks to a part of us that can't be put into words. It soothes, warns, excites, unites, and helps us grieve. A lullaby calms a child, a drumbeat gathers warriors, a song at a ceremony marks a moment. Music is something we understand without needing to explain. It crosses continents and cultures. A melody from the mountains might touch someone by the sea. A drum from one island echoes in another's heart. Music changes and survives. It travels, absorbs, adapts. Instruments move from place to place. Songs are sung in new languages. Rhythms are reimagined, but at its heart, music remains. Rhythm, tone, feeling. Across history, music tells our stories. It shapes who we are, but also lets us reach beyond who we are. You don't need to speak the same words to feel the same music. Today, science shows us what people have always known. Music changes the mind and body. It soothes stress and sparks memories. Even in people who have lost their ability to speak, treasured songs can bring a smile. From tiny babies soothed by song, to people healing in hospitals, music is always there, in mourning, in protest, in prayer, in celebration. No matter where we go, music gives us a thread, tying us back to our earliest ancestors, the ones who blew gently on bird bones in silent caves or set a beat with stick or hand. Even in our loud, busy world, music reminds us that we are not machines. We are living beings whose hearts are meant to be moved. And as long as we can feel, we will create music. Because long before any story was told, music was already there, carrying us forward.